The flashbulbs were merciless that Paris afternoon. Outside the glassy doors of the Balenciaga Spring-Summer 2026 show, the air trembled with anticipation, perfume, and power. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Fashion insiders whispered, photographers shouted, and guests moved like a living runway. And then she appeared, Meghan Markle, stepping out of a black car in an all-white ensemble so pristine that for a second, the crowd actually fell silent. Cameras clicked in a frenzy, like hail against metal. The Duchess of Sussex had arrived. But what no one knew then was that this entrance would ignite one of the most volatile fashion feuds in recent history. At first glance, it seemed like just another Meghan Markle moment. The confident stride, the knowing smile, the subtle tilt of her chin toward the cameras. She had perfected this choreography years ago, blending royal composure with Hollywood poise. But behind the polished exterior, tension was already brewing. Whispers among stylists hinted that she wasn't officially invited by Balenciaga, that her name had somehow appeared on the guest list at the 11th hour. And inside the brand's marble corridors, executives weren't celebrating her arrival. They were fuming. The story that unfolded in the days after that show became a storm that swallowed headlines. Balenciaga's powerful director, Gianfranco Giannangeli, reportedly vowed to erase her name from every internal conversation, every whispered collaboration, every possible project. His words, sharp, deliberate, and personal, cut through the fashion world like glass. "She is nothing," he was quoted as saying. "We will bury her name. We will bury her career." To some, it sounded like an overreaction. To others, it was a declaration of war. A fashion house defending its pride against a woman who refused to bow. But what exactly pushed Balenciaga to that breaking point? Was it simply an issue of control? A brand protecting its image? Or did Meghan cross an invisible line that even global celebrities fear to tread? The truth, as it turned out, was tangled in ego, ambition, and a trail of whispered warnings stretching back years. For Meghan, attending the Balenciaga show was more than just another red carpet appearance. It was an opportunity to reclaim the narrative, to reestablish her identity in the elite fashion world that had once embraced her and then quietly moved on. In the weeks leading up to Paris, her team had carefully planned the look: the white silk coat dress, the minimalist diamond studs, the quiet symbolism of purity and renewal. It wasn't just about beauty, it was about reassertion. Meghan wanted to be seen not as the exiled royal or the polarizing public figure, but as a global fashion voice, independent, sophisticated, untouchable. And for a few fleeting moments, it worked. The photos that flooded social media showed a radiant woman owning her space. But as the applause faded and the after-show chatter turned to gossip, a darker version of the story began to circulate. Insiders claimed that Meghan had made bold requests, allegedly demanding that Balenciaga's CEO approve a separate photo campaign featuring her image along the Champs-Élysées. Others whispered that she had attempted to negotiate personal branding deals directly through stylists, bypassing standard fashion protocols. Whether these claims were true or exaggerated hardly mattered. In fashion, perception is power, and perception had turned against her overnight. Inside Balenciaga's headquarters, sources described a tense meeting that stretched late into the night. Gianfranco Giannangeli, known for his fierce protection of the Balenciaga image, was said to be livid. He reportedly viewed Meghan's alleged actions as a public challenge to the brand's authority. The next morning, confidential emails flew between Paris, London, and Los Angeles. And within days, the statement leaked to the press, the vow to end all association with her, to make sure her name never again appears beside Balenciaga. In the language of high fashion, it was a death sentence. But behind the outrage and drama, something deeper was at play, something that spoke to the fragile dance between celebrity and luxury. In today's fashion world, image is a currency more valuable than diamonds. Celebrities rely on fashion houses to maintain relevance. Brands rely on celebrities to fuel global appeal. The relationship is transactional, but it's also territorial. When either side oversteps, the fallout can be devastating. Meghan, whether knowingly or not, had stepped into that territory armed with royal defiance and Hollywood ambition. And Balenciaga, a house already scarred by past controversies, decided to fight back with silence and power. What makes this feud especially fascinating is how fast it escalated. In a matter of hours, what began as a glamorous appearance turned into a full-blown media war. Analysts debated whether Meghan's rumored threat to sue Balenciaga for brand defamation was real or strategic. PR agencies scrambled to manage narratives on both sides. Fashion columnists dissected every frame of video footage, searching for signs of tension between Meghan and Ginangeli during the show. Even rival fashion houses were reportedly taking notes, not out of sympathy, but caution. As the dust settled, one question lingered. How could someone once celebrated for her style evolution become a pariah in the very world that helped elevate her image? The answer lies not in a single event, but in a series of choices, each one reflecting Meghan's relentless need for control over her story. Ever since stepping away from royal life, she had sought to build her own brand identity. Part activist, part entrepreneur, part icon. But in doing so, she often clashed with industries that demanded conformity above all else. Fashion, with its quiet hierarchies and unspoken loyalties, was one of them. The introduction to this saga isn't just about a fallout between a celebrity and a fashion label. It's about two empires colliding, the Markle brand versus the Balenciaga empire. Both built on prestige, both obsessed with image, both unforgiving when challenged. Meghan represented a new kind of influence, one shaped by digital platforms and emotional storytelling. Balenciaga represented old-world power, where reputation is managed behind closed doors and silence speaks louder than scandal. When those worlds met in Paris, something had to give. And as the story spread, so did the division. Supporters defended Meghan, calling her a victim of industry politics and elitist gatekeeping. Critics accused her of entitlement and manipulation. Fashion insiders privately admitted that while Balenciaga's reaction was brutal, it wasn't surprising. They don't like being embarrassed, one anonymous stylist said. If you challenge them publicly, they make sure you never walk their runway again. Even as the media frenzy continued, Meghan remained quiet. Her team issued no statements, no denials, no clarifications. Silence, perhaps, was strategic, or maybe it was exhaustion. After years of public scrutiny, she knew that every word would be dissected and weaponized. Still, her silence left room for interpretation, and in the vacuum, the narrative hardened. Balenciaga had blacklisted her, and Ginangeli had made it personal. What makes the introduction of this story truly gripping isn't just the conflict itself, but what it represents, the end of an illusion. For years, Meghan had walked the fine line between royalty and celebrity, fashion muse and rebel icon. The Balenciaga feud exposed the cracks in that balance. It showed that even the most carefully crafted public image can crumble under the weight of ego, misunderstanding, and timing. One wrong word, one perceived slight, and alliances forged in glamour can dissolve overnight. The stage is set for a deeper exploration. The inside meetings, the lawsuit threats, the emotional fallout, the whispered words that turned into headlines. But for now, one thing is clear. In the world of high fashion, reputation isn't just everything. It's survival. And for Meghan Markle, what began as a dazzling appearance under the Parisian sun would soon become a nightmare she couldn't control. The lights of Paris dimmed. The applause faded. And as Meghan's car pulled away from the venue, behind those tinted windows, she likely had no idea just how far this would go. Because the next chapter, the one written not by stylists or journalists, but by powerful men in quiet boardrooms, was already being drafted. And this time, the story wasn't hers to tell. The cameras never stopped flashing. Meghan's all-white ensemble that day wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a declaration. White in the world of high couture is purity, control, and defiance all at once. Every piece she wore had been carefully selected to send a message. She was back, confident, and untouchable. Her coat dress flowed with precision tailoring that caught the light as she stepped onto the stone pavement, each movement deliberate, almost cinematic. The crowd's reaction was electric, but mixed, half admiration, half suspicion. She didn't walk into Paris Fashion Week like a guest. She walked in like a storm. That morning, before she left the hotel, her team had been on edge. Assistants moved like shadows around her suite, checking every seam, every accessory, every strand of hair. According to one insider close to her circle, Meghan had insisted the look be impossible to ignore. The plan was simple but risky: outshine every invited guest without being officially listed as one. It was a gamble that had worked before for Hollywood stars, but fashion houses were not known for forgiving uninvited statements. Still, she went ahead, confident that her presence alone would force acceptance. After all, she was the Duchess of Sussex. For years, that title had opened doors no one else could even knock on. As she arrived at the venue, the crowd gasped. Cameras fought to capture the moment. Paris had seen its share of celebrities, but this was different. This was royal intrigue mixed with fashion spectacle. Meghan smiled for the flashes, her hand brushing against the coat lapel. That subtle move meant to display the diamond ring still on her finger, a reminder of her royal link even as her relationship with the institution strained. The photographers shouted her name. For a few seconds, she owned the moment completely. Yet behind the velvet ropes, the whispers had already started. Balenciaga's senior staff reportedly exchanged looks of disbelief. Her name, according to sources, hadn't appeared on the official list. Some assistants scrambled to confirm if perhaps an error had been made. Others stood frozen, aware that any reaction, welcoming or dismissive, could become a headline within minutes. Gianfranco Ginangeli, the brand's director, was said to be watching from backstage, his expression unreadable. The appearance had blindsided the team, and in the fashion world, surprise rarely meant delight. Inside, Meghan took her seat in the second row, close enough to be seen, not close enough to offend. But proximity in fashion isn't measured by distance, it's measured by approval. Her presence caused visible tension. Some attendees smiled politely, others avoided eye contact. Journalists murmured, noting that no Balenciaga representative approached her directly. Still, Meghan kept her posture impeccable, every movement practiced for the cameras. To an observer, it was elegance. To insiders, it was defiance dressed in silk. As the show began, she leaned slightly forward, focused, her expression calm but unreadable. Models swept past, showcasing the clean, futuristic silhouettes Balenciaga was known for. But even as art met runway, Meghan's presence seemed to pull attention from the designs themselves. Commentators online began to shift focus away from the collection toward her unexpected appearance. Within minutes, her image trended across multiple platforms. Yet not all comments were flattering. Some praised her confidence. Others called it a desperate bid for relevance. The polarizing reactions mirrored her entire public journey since stepping back from royal duties. Admired and attacked in equal measure. After the show, Meghan moved to exit, followed by a swarm of photographers. Reporters tried to question her about her relationship with Balenciaga, but she offered no words, just that closed-lipped smile that said everything and nothing. What she didn't know then was that behind the venue, away from the cameras, Balenciaga's internal team was already debriefing. Security reports noted that her appearance had not been cleared through any formal communication. Publicists feared that her unapproved attendance could spark misinterpretations about sponsorship or collaboration. And most importantly, Ginangeli reportedly viewed it as a direct challenge to the brand's authority. To understand the weight of that moment, one must understand the world Meghan stepped into. Balenciaga isn't merely a fashion label, it's a fortress of control. Every name on its guest list is curated with precision. Each collaboration undergoes months of quiet vetting. Nothing is left to chance. Meghan's decision to attend without prior authorization disrupted that delicate structure. It wasn't just about a seat at a show. It was about the brand's image, its hierarchy, and its pride. In an industry where reputation is a language of power, her move was seen as an intrusion into sacred territory. Still, from Meghan's perspective, the gesture made sense. She had spent years reshaping her image, and what better place than Paris, the capital of reinvention, to announce her return? Her attire wasn't chosen for comfort. It was a strategy. The crisp whiteness represented a reset, an unspoken plea to be seen beyond controversy. Even her makeup reflected minimalism. Soft eyes, neutral lips, the illusion of effortlessness concealing layers of preparation. Every visual detail reinforced the narrative she wanted. Renewal, independence, and elegance without apology. Later that evening, social media was ablaze. Influencers debated whether Meghan had been personally invited or had invited herself. Screenshots of supposed text exchanges between stylists circulated online, fueling speculation. Some users praised her for courageously facing an industry that had distanced itself. Others accused her of arrogance. By midnight, the story had split the internet into two camps: supporters celebrating her return to high fashion, and critics mocking the attempt as performative desperation. But while the public argued, Balenciaga's leadership remained ominously silent. The next morning, an anonymous source within the brand leaked to a journalist that Ginangeli was not amused. The report described internal frustration over her alleged request to have her images displayed on Balenciaga billboards, something the brand had never promised or even discussed. Whether that request was real or fabricated, no one could confirm. But the rumor spread faster than any press release could contain it. Within 24 hours, major outlets framed the event not as a surprise appearance, but as a conflict. Meghan Markle clashes with Balenciaga leadership after Paris show, one headline read. Others went further, painting her as a provocateur deliberately stirring controversy. For Meghan, the reaction must have felt familiar. Praise turning to backlash, admiration twisting into suspicion. She had walked this path before in different arenas, but this time the stakes were corporate, not personal. The fashion world operates through invisible alliances. Brands whisper to one another, share information, and maintain unspoken pacts about who is in and who is out. That night, according to industry chatter, Ginangeli made his stance clear. Balenciaga would never associate with her again. Not in private meetings, not in photo campaigns, not even by coincidence. This moment, the all-white appearance that was meant to mark her fashion redemption, became the spark that lit an inferno. The symbolism she had chosen so carefully turned against her. White, once meant as a canvas of purity, became the color of surrender in headlines. Frozen out in white, one article wrote. The phrase stuck. It encapsulated the divide between Meghan's intent and the world's perception. What she viewed as empowerment, others saw as entitlement. And in that gap between vision and reception, her image fractured once again. But beneath the scandal, there was something raw, something undeniably human. Meghan had taken a risk to reclaim her narrative in an industry that thrives on control. She entered that building believing she could rewrite her relationship with fashion through sheer willpower. For a few brief minutes, she did. Yet power in fashion isn't seized by presence alone. It's granted through acceptance by those who guard the gates. And Balenciaga, for all its global glamour, guards those gates with unforgiving resolve. As the lights dimmed across Paris that night, the photographs continued to circulate, endlessly analyzed, reposted, reframed. To some, they captured courage. To others, overreach. But what no one outside those glass walls saw was the tension that brewed quietly within Balenciaga's upper floors. The whispered words that would later shape an ultimatum. The air in those offices was colder than the Paris rain. The conversations short and sharp. A decision was coming, one that would echo far beyond fashion weeks or runway reviews. Meghan's name, once spoken in admiration within those circles, was now being discussed as a problem that needed resolving. The woman in white had come to reclaim her place under the lights, but what awaited her was darkness she hadn't anticipated. And as that realization settled behind the scenes, a line had been crossed that neither side could easily walk back. Behind the mirrored walls of Balenciaga's Paris headquarters, the mood was nothing short of volcanic. The morning after the Spring-Summer 2026 show, the usually sleek and silent building buzzed with agitation. Assistants hurried across the marble floors, clutching folders, whispering into earpieces, and avoiding eye contact with the brand's top executives. Overnight, What should have been a triumphant post-show celebration had turned into a damage control emergency. The reason was not a failed design, a faulty runway light, or a critical review. It was one name: Meghan Markle. By dawn, screenshots, opinion pieces, and gossip headlines had already painted a narrative of defiance and disrespect. The words "unauthorized appearance" circulated across internal messages. Within the first hour of the morning, an emergency meeting had been called on the 5th floor, the boardroom known internally as the Vault, a space reserved for only the most delicate brand crises. Inside sat Gianfranco Ginangeli, the man whose word could move markets and end careers. He was known for his ruthless calm, the kind that made others lower their voices instinctively. But that morning he wasn't calm. He was livid. The meeting began with silence, a tension so heavy that even the hum of the overhead lights seemed too loud. Then, one of the communications directors cleared her throat and began summarizing the timeline. The Duchess's uninvited arrival, her alleged request to be featured in Balenciaga's marketing materials, the immediate explosion on social media, and the confusion among brand partners. Ginangeli listened, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, expression blank. When the presentation ended, he asked one question, softly, almost too softly. Who approved her? No one answered. Still, Meghan was furious. According to one insider, she slammed her phone on the desk and said, "They used me for publicity, then turned around and humiliated me. I won't let them get away with it." The accusation, as she framed it, was that Balenciaga had benefited from her presence at the show, allowing her to be photographed, basking in the viral exposure, and then deliberately distanced itself to protect its own image. She felt exploited, used as bait to generate buzz, only to be discarded once the cameras had captured enough. Whether that interpretation was accurate or not no longer mattered. What mattered was how her camp would spin it. Within 24 hours, her legal advisors began drafting a preliminary statement that hinted at possible legal action for defamation through implied association and intentional emotional harm. The language was vague enough to attract headlines but pointed enough to signal intent. It was a familiar Meghan strategy: threaten litigation without confirming it, keeping the other side in a constant state of defensive speculation. Her team contacted publicists in New York to prepare for potential media coverage. Leaks began appearing in entertainment outlets suggesting that Meghan was considering legal options against the brand. The words "threaten to sue" appeared across headlines like wildfire. For her supporters, this painted her as bold, standing up against corporate elitism. For her critics, it confirmed their belief that she couldn't handle rejection without turning it into spectacle. Meanwhile, across the channel, Gianfranco Ginangeli was informed of the developments through an early morning email. His response, according to someone who witnessed it, was a single line: "If she wants a war, she'll have one." In his eyes, Meghan's move wasn't just aggressive, it was reckless. Balenciaga had weathered storms before: boycotts, PR disasters, moral outrage. But none of those threatened the authority of its leadership the way Meghan's legal gambit did. The moment her lawyers even hinted at litigation, Ginangeli reportedly activated what insiders called containment protocol. The brand's internal legal team began collecting every document, email, and communication from the show weekend, preparing to defend against potential defamation claims. But more importantly, the PR division was instructed not to engage publicly at all. Silence, once again, would be their weapon. In the world of global PR, silence is not weakness, it's control. When a brand refuses to respond, it starves the story of oxygen, leaving the other side to scream into an echo chamber. Meghan's team didn't anticipate how effective that silence would be. For days, her legal hints dominated gossip columns, but the absence of any reaction from Balenciaga made her seem one-sided, even desperate. "You can't sue silence," one French fashion journalist quipped online, and the line went viral. Still, Meghan persisted. According to a source within her circle, she wanted the case to represent more than personal offense. She wanted it to expose what she called elitist exclusion. To her, this wasn't just about an invitation, it was about respect. "They think they can blacklist me because I'm not one of them," she reportedly told her advisors. "They've done it to others. "They won't do it to me." The lawyers tried to temper her expectations. Proving defamation in this context would be nearly impossible. No public statement had been made against her. The humiliation she felt, while real, wasn't legally actionable. But emotion often overpowered logic in her decision-making. She believed that even the act of threatening legal action would shift public sympathy her way. She was half right. Across social platforms, a wave of debate erupted. Supporters launched hashtags defending her right to attend any fashion show she pleased. They framed her as a victim of the same gatekeeping that had plagued women of color in elite spaces for decades. Critics fired back, arguing that Meghan's sense of entitlement was the real issue, that she had overstepped and was now weaponizing her public image to cover the embarrassment. The internet became her courtroom. Meanwhile, Ginangeli made a few discreet phone calls to long-standing allies in media. He didn't have to say much. A few pointed remarks about professionalism and brand integrity were enough to tilt coverage subtly against her. Editors understood what was being asked without a direct order. Stories began to shift tone. Balenciaga maintains dignity amid royal tantrum. The phrase spread like perfume through the air: elegant, cutting, unforgettable. By the end of that week, Meghan's legal threat had backfired. Instead of painting her as a victim, it reignited the familiar image of a woman at war with herself. Someone constantly battling institutions, always claiming betrayal, never finding peace. The silence from Balenciaga became a statement of its own, an elegant refusal to dignify what it considered a publicity ploy. But Meghan wasn't finished. Behind the scenes, she instructed her media strategist to prepare an image recovery plan. The first step, a carefully crafted interview where she could hint at feeling deeply disrespected by certain unnamed individuals in the fashion world. The goal wasn't to name Balenciaga outright, but to keep the mystery alive, feeding the narrative while avoiding further legal escalation. Yet every word she spoke, every veiled insinuation, only deepened the divide. Fashion insiders, loyal to Ginangeli, began closing ranks. Invitations dried up. Calls stopped coming. One by one, her connections to top designers faded into silence. There was also the matter of money. The rumored $190,000 appearance deal she had allegedly requested from Balenciaga's marketing division became the next flashpoint. The figure, though never officially confirmed, appeared in multiple tabloid reports. The suggestion that Meghan had demanded payment for attending the show enraged her critics and embarrassed her supporters. In luxury fashion, true influence is shown by who's invited, not who's paid. That single rumor turned her from a guest into a mercenary in the eyes of insiders. When she heard about it, Meghan reportedly broke down in anger. She accused Balenciaga of leaking false information to smear her image. Her lawyers demanded a retraction from several media outlets, but without proof of who originated the story, there was nothing to retract. The rumor stayed alive, feeding the narrative that she was desperate for relevance and profit. The legal strategy faltered soon after. The team realized that continuing the threat without evidence would open them to ridicule. By the end of the second week, the documents that had been prepared were quietly shelved. There would be no lawsuit, but the damage was done. Ginangeli, satisfied that silence had achieved what no courtroom could, instructed his PR team to resume normal operations. To him, the matter was over. For Meghan, it was just beginning. The fallout from that aborted lawsuit was worse than any ruling could have been. Industry insiders began whispering that she was radioactive. Even those who sympathized privately avoided public association. One fashion editor put it bluntly: "You can't build a career on lawsuits and self-promotion. People get tired of the noise." In the end, Meghan's attempt to use legal leverage against Balenciaga became the very proof of the narrative she wanted to destroy. The lawsuit never reached a courtroom, but it left a stain she couldn't scrub away. For Ginangeli, the silence was victory. For Meghan, it was another lesson in the cost of challenging power in an arena where influence, not justice, decides who wins. And as Paris moved on, hosting another round of glamorous events, Meghan's name began quietly disappearing from guest lists. Her team noticed, her stylists noticed, Even her longtime supporters in the industry noticed. The woman who once captivated the fashion world with every appearance was now finding doors closed that used to swing open. But this wasn't the end of her story. It was the spark that would ignite something far more personal. Because behind her anger, beneath the public outrage, there was something deeper brewing. A need to prove that she couldn't be erased. She had lost a battle, but in her mind, the war for image, power, and respect was only just beginning. The storm broke quietly. No cameras caught it. No public statement announced it. Yet inside Balenciaga's Paris office, the atmosphere was charged with a kind of fury that could only come from wounded pride. Gianfranco Gianangeli sat at the head of the table, reviewing a series of internal memos that had been circulated since the lawsuit threats began. His jaw was tense, his posture perfectly still. Those who worked closest to him knew what that stillness meant. It wasn't calm. It was containment before eruption. He read every line carefully. Mentions of Meghan's demands. Reports of her alleged threat to sue. Notes about her team's contact with journalists. He didn't interrupt. He didn't sigh. When he finally put the papers down, he looked around the table, his expression hard enough to silence the room. Enough, he said simply. To Gianangeli, this wasn't just a celebrity scandal. It was a matter of legacy. He had spent years rebuilding Balenciaga's brand reputation after prior controversies had shaken it to the core. He had defended its artistry, navigated criticism, and restored faith among its elite clientele. And now, in his mind, a woman who wasn't even supposed to be at the show had single-handedly reopened every wound the house had worked to heal. The headlines weren't talking about design, innovation, or vision anymore. They were about her. Her drama, her threats, her ego, and that, to him, was unforgivable. She thinks she can drag my name, my company, through the mud because she lost control of her story, he said sharply, turning toward his communications director. We are not part of her performance. We are not her stage. The director nodded nervously but didn't speak. Gianangeli didn't need confirmation, he needed control. And when control slipped from his grasp, his instinct was always to reclaim it with precision. The first order of business was clear. Balenciaga would not respond publicly, but privately, every connection Meghan had left in the European fashion scene would be cautioned. Within hours, quiet calls began. To editors, stylists, photographers, and PR managers. No written orders, no traceable statements. Just subtle reminders that Balenciaga did not wish to be associated with her in any form. In the language of fashion diplomacy, those few words carried lethal weight. They didn't blacklist directly. They influenced silently. Within a week, 2 major magazines that had planned features around Meghan's style reconsidered their spreads. Invitations to upcoming couture events vanished. Even independent stylists, those who once courted her for collaborations, suddenly found themselves unavailable. But the escalation wasn't complete until Gianangeli made it personal. During a late-night meeting with his core advisors, he spoke words that would later define the entire feud. We don't erase her because she offends us, he said coldly. We erase her because she doesn't matter. She is nothing in this world now. And nothing is what she will remain. Those words, according to 2 insiders present, were spoken with such measured calm that no one dared to breathe. The meeting ended shortly after, but the damage was irreversible. When one of the attendees, frustrated or perhaps fascinated by the statement, leaked the quote to a journalist, it spread faster than any official press release ever could. The words, "she's nothing," became the headline that would echo across social media, igniting fresh outrage and sympathy in equal measure. For Meghan, those 2 words were a dagger. They struck at the very core of her public identity. An identity built on defiance, resilience, and the constant need to prove worth. The moment she saw the headlines, sources say, she was silent for almost a full minute before saying, "He'll regret that." But her anger couldn't reverse the momentum. The story wasn't about what she said or didn't say anymore. It was about how the fashion world was closing in around her. Meanwhile, Gianangeli refused to flinch. Reporters tried to bait him into a statement. Requests for comment flooded Balenciaga's PR office. His instructions never changed. No response. His silence became its own narrative, a show of dominance that said everything without a word. It was as though he had turned her into a ghost. Every attempt to revive her fashion image met the same invisible wall of disinterest. Behind closed doors, however, Ginangeli was far from indifferent. He followed every article, every tweet, every panel discussion about the feud. He studied how the media dissected his silence, how some painted him as a villain and others hailed him as a protector of artistic integrity. The duality didn't bother him. He understood power wasn't about being loved. It was about being feared and respected in equal measure. He also understood Meghan's playbook. The public sympathy, the interviews framed as emotional resilience, the carefully orchestrated tears that turned scandal into narrative. He'd seen it before. In his mind, Meghan wasn't a victim of the system. She was the system, one that fed on drama and attention. He wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. If you starve the fire of oxygen, it burns itself out, he reportedly told a colleague. And she's already gasping. For days, Balenciaga's corporate channels stayed silent. Not a single executive posted on social media. Every employee had been instructed to avoid even mentioning her name in passing. It was an eerie kind of revenge, a blackout so complete that it became psychological warfare. The very absence of response made her presence fade faster than any scandal could. Fashion, after all, thrives on the next headline, the next star. And Balenciaga had decided that Meghan would be neither. But for all his precision, Ginangeli underestimated one thing: how personal the feud had already become. It wasn't just professional retaliation anymore. It was pride against pride. Meghan wasn't retreating quietly. While Balenciaga froze her out, her PR team began pitching subtle counter-narratives. Stories about the cruelty of the fashion elite, about a woman silenced for challenging industry power. The goal wasn't victory but survival. Yet the more she tried to resist the erasure, the more Ginangeli doubled down. Behind the scenes, he approved a new wave of collaborations with other high-profile ambassadors, deliberately amplifying women who embodied the opposite of Meghan's brand: graceful, discreet, loyal to fashion's unspoken codes. One campaign featured a model known for avoiding controversy entirely, photographed in the same type of white outfit Meghan had worn in Paris. The symbolism wasn't accidental. It was a quiet statement. The message was clear. Purity didn't come from rebellion. It came from obedience to the house. As the campaign went live, social media noticed. Balenciaga's subtle dig? Read one post. Another wrote, they replaced Meghan's moment with their own version. The speculation only fueled Ginangeli's dominance. He had turned her defiance into a footnote in his brand's resurgence. For the first time since the scandal began, Balenciaga's internal analytics reported a surge in engagement, not from Meghan's supporters, but from fashion loyalists applauding the brand's restraint. The silence had become strategy. The strategy had become victory. Yet, in private, Ginangeli wasn't celebrating. He viewed the entire ordeal as contamination, an unfortunate stain he was determined to scrub clean. Those close to him said he rarely spoke her name anymore, referring to her only as that woman. To him, she had ceased to exist. But one evening, as he reviewed reports in his office, he reportedly paused over a photo, Meghan at the Paris show, surrounded by flashing cameras, wearing that now infamous white ensemble. For a brief second, he smiled, not with amusement but recognition. He understood her drive even if he despised it. She wants to be seen, he muttered, almost to himself. And that's the one thing I can take away from her. It was that thought, cold, deliberate, that cemented his resolve. There would be no reconciliation, no apology, no backstage truce over champagne. Balenciaga's director wasn't just cutting ties with Meghan Markle. He was ensuring that every thread connecting her to the house was burned beyond repair. Over the next weeks, Balenciaga's influence quietly worked through the industry. Fashion editors stopped referencing Meghan's name in connection with couture. Stylists were advised, discreetly but firmly, to avoid her for red carpet events. PR agencies found excuses not to return calls from her representatives. To the outside world, it looked like coincidence. To insiders, it was strategy executed with surgical precision. And as Ginangeli turned his focus back to new collections, Meghan's absence became the loudest silence of all. The show that had once introduced her as an uninvited guest became the last she would ever attend under Balenciaga's roof. The director's vow to bury her name and her career within the walls of fashion's inner sanctum was complete. But what no one in those mirrored offices could predict was that silence, once absolute, can sometimes echo louder than words. Meghan's erasure would become its own controversy. Her supporters, her critics, her allies, they would all demand answers. And in doing so, they would drag the feud back into the light, exactly where neither side wanted it. The empire had struck first. But Meghan, as history would soon show, was far from finished. In the world of luxury fashion, power isn't written in contracts. It's whispered in backrooms, exchanged in coded phrases, and enforced through silence. Every model, designer, and public figure who has ever tried to challenge that order learns the same unspoken truth. Fashion doesn't forgive, it forgets. And once it forgets you, it's as if you never existed. When Meghan Markle collided with Balenciaga's authority, she wasn't just facing one brand. She was stepping into a labyrinth of alliances that make and unmake careers with the flick of a wrist. Behind the glimmer of runway lights, there's a system so deeply entrenched that even the boldest celebrities fear to test it. It's not written down anywhere, but every insider knows it by heart. The hidden code of the fashion elite. This code has no name, no formal acknowledgement, but it governs everything. Who gets invited, who gets seated, who gets featured, and who vanishes. At its heart lies one principle: control. The brand is God, and the image is sacred. Anyone who threatens that sanctity, whether intentionally or by arrogance, is quietly erased. Meghan's name became a prime example of how swiftly that erasure could be enacted once the system turned against you. Her situation was not unique, but it was unprecedented in scale. Few people outside the industry truly understand how coordinated fashion power can be. On the surface, it appears competitive: Gucci versus Dior, Prada versus Balenciaga. But beneath the rivalry lies a shared understanding. The elite protect their own order. When one brand is disrespected publicly, the others take note. In Meghan's case, the contagion spread fast. Photographers who had once called her a dream subject began turning down her team's requests for editorial shoots. Agencies removed her from internal proposal decks. Some publications even archived or quietly edited old pieces featuring her to avoid backlash from Balenciaga and its allies. But where did this invisible power originate? The code was born decades ago, from the same place that birthed haute couture itself: exclusivity. Fashion was never built to be fair, it was built to be selective. The higher the gate, the greater the prestige of those allowed inside. And those who breached that order without invitation were swiftly reminded of their place. Meghan's arrival at Balenciaga's show, uninvited and defiant, was interpreted not as ambition but as violation. In that single act, she broke the oldest rule in fashion's book: never enter without being asked. Once broken, that rule demands a price. The code's enforcers don't need to issue threats. They let isolation do the work. The strategy is elegant, almost artistic: erasure disguised as natural consequence. When Meghan's name began disappearing from luxury conversations, it wasn't labeled punishment. It was called moving forward. The industry never admits when it ostracizes someone. It simply shifts its attention elsewhere until the target fades from relevance. The cruel brilliance of the code lies in its subtlety. Even those enforcing it often believe they're just following instinct, not orders. Editors convince themselves they're choosing fresher subjects. Designers claim they're focusing on new directions. Photographers say they're overbooked. It's all theater, an elaborate ritual to maintain purity within a world that thrives on illusion. For Meghan, this invisible curtain was more suffocating than open hostility. When someone attacks you publicly, you can defend yourself. But when the world simply stops acknowledging you, there's nothing to fight against. She was still famous, still followed, still discussed. But in the rooms that mattered, her name was erased from mood boards, proposal drafts, and seating charts. Fashion insiders began to speak about her in the past tense. She had potential, one stylist remarked in a leaked voice note. But she doesn't understand the rules. That single line summed up the entire system. The rules are never stated aloud, yet everyone knows them. Don't outshine the house. Don't challenge authority. Don't make it personal. And above all, don't make noise. When Meghan threatened to sue Balenciaga, she broke every one of those rules at once. To the industry, that wasn't courage, it was chaos. Brands survive on predictability. A figure who brings unpredictability becomes a liability. So the industry did what it always does when confronted with chaos. It closed its doors. Yet behind that cold efficiency, there's a darker truth about why the system reacts so violently to rebellion. The fashion world has built its power on illusion, the illusion of accessibility, of glamour, of inclusivity. But that illusion depends on a rigid hierarchy. When someone like Meghan steps out of line, she exposes the lie beneath the polish. Her very defiance threatens to remind the world that beneath the sequins and press releases, fashion is still a game of obedience to power. And that's something the code cannot tolerate. What made Meghan's case exceptional wasn't just the swiftness of her fall. It was how global it became. Most people who cross the industry fade quietly, unnoticed. Meghan's fame made her erasure visible in real time. Audiences could see it happening. The shift from celebration to silence, from admiration to avoidance. In a strange way, her downfall became the proof of the very system that destroyed her. Still, even as her influence waned, her defiance didn't. Behind closed doors, Meghan reportedly told her team that she would rebuild her image without them. "If they won't have me," she said, "I'll build my own table." It was an echo of her earlier independence, the same resolve that made her leave the royal family. But building your own table means nothing when no one's willing to sit at it. Meanwhile, the code continued its quiet enforcement. At international events, Meghan found herself seated further from key figures. Invitations arrived late or not at all. Red carpet photographers, once eager for her shots, now saved their flashes for others. Even brands she had never feuded with began to distance themselves preemptively. They didn't need a reason. The reason was already understood. And yet, in this silence, there was something revealing. The industry's need to erase her said more about its fragility than her defiance. Power that must punish dissent to maintain order is never as stable as it appears. Fashion presents itself as art, but behind the runways and perfume campaigns lies a machinery that thrives on control. Control of image, narrative, and behavior. Meghan had challenged that machinery, and it retaliated the only way it knew how, by pretending she didn't exist. But what the industry failed to anticipate was how visible that silence would become. In an age where audiences watch everything, omission speaks as loudly as scandal. The more Balenciaga and its allies avoided her, the more people noticed the absence. "Why is no one talking about Meghan?" became a trending question online. That curiosity kept her story alive, turning her erasure into exposure. The hidden fashion code had succeeded in removing her from the table, but it had also made her a symbol. To some, she became proof of elitism in luxury culture. To others, she remained a cautionary tale about hubris. Either way, the system that tried to bury her had accidentally kept her relevant by the very act of erasure. Inside Balenciaga's offices, executives congratulated themselves on closing the chapter. But outside those walls, her absence became a narrative too compelling to ignore. The more she was excluded, the more her followers framed her as a rebel. Silence, once a weapon, began to look like guilt. The fashion code had worked in the shadows for decades, but for the first time, someone's exile was visible to the public. And the audience, ever hungry for controversy, wanted more. This was the paradox that Gianfranco Gennangeli and his world couldn't escape. In trying to erase her, they had given her story new life. The hidden code of fashion had been exposed, not by confession, but by its own precision. Meghan's defiance had forced a spotlight onto the very machinery that tried to silence her. the fashion world would pretend not to notice. It always does. But in private conversations between stylists, editors, and ambitious young designers, the lesson was whispered again and again. Never challenge the code. Meghan Markle had, and she had paid the price. Still, every code has its cracks. And in the silence that followed her exile, those cracks began to widen. Because no system, no matter how powerful, remains untouchable forever, especially not when the person it tries to erase refuses to disappear. From the beginning, Meghan Markle's relationship with the fashion world had been both magnetic and precarious. A love affair built on admiration, tension, and quiet mistrust. Long before her Balenciaga fallout, her rise through the corridors of couture had always carried the shadow of controversy. She wasn't like the others who entered fashion's world by birthright or apprenticeship. She entered it through global attention, through marriage into the most photographed family on earth. To the designers who built their empires on control, that kind of fame was both a gift and a curse. When Meghan first emerged as the Duchess of Sussex, the industry saw opportunity. She had a global following, an undeniable sense of presence, and a face that cameras adored. For brands like Givenchy, Dior, and Stella McCartney, dressing her wasn't just design, it was diplomacy. Her wedding gown by Givenchy's Claire Waite-Keller instantly made her a global fashion figure, fusing Hollywood glamour with royal dignity. But even in those early days, behind the polished press releases and the compliments, there was tension. Meghan had opinions, strong ones, about her image, her wardrobe, and how she wanted to be seen. That independence, while celebrated publicly, quietly unsettled an industry built on deference. In the early months of her royal life, Meghan was the world's muse. Every outfit sold out within hours. Every coat, every handbag, every shoe she wore was replicated and dissected across continents. Brands called it the Markle effect, a phenomenon so powerful it could boost stock prices overnight. But success in fashion comes with expectation. Behind every image were stylists negotiating brand placements, designers fighting for exposure, and executives deciding who deserved credit. Meghan's insistence on choosing her own looks, sometimes mixing affordable brands with luxury, broke the formula. To her, it was authenticity. To the houses, it was unpredictability. Even within palace walls, her approach to fashion raised eyebrows. She preferred minimalism over royal tradition, monochrome statements over floral diplomacy. Her clothing often carried quiet symbolism. Black when she was meant to wear color, muted tones when protocol demanded vibrance. Every appearance became an act of rebellion wrapped in couture. Yet, what made her admired by the public made her dangerous to the system behind the scenes. She doesn't play by fashion's rules, one stylist whispered after her first royal tour. She plays by her own. When Meghan and Prince Harry stepped away from royal duties, that fragile relationship between her and the fashion elite began to crack. Freed from royal constraints, she sought to rebrand herself as a modern global influencer, a humanitarian and style icon on her own terms. But independence comes at a cost. Without the royal institution as her frame, she had to rely solely on her own reputation. The moment she left that golden bubble, the fashion world's gaze shifted from reverence to scrutiny. Her collaborations with luxury designers became fewer, her appearances rarer. Rumors spread that some brands hesitated to associate with her, fearing backlash from British loyalists who saw her departure as betrayal. Others quietly admitted that Meghan had become too political, too unpredictable for an industry that preferred neutrality dressed as art. Even the designers who had once dressed her for royal galas began to distance themselves, citing scheduling conflicts or creative direction changes. In reality, many simply didn't want to risk the polarizing weight her name now carried. Still, Meghan tried to adapt. She reinvented her public style, shifting from royal modesty to Hollywood sleekness. At premieres and charity galas, she favored modern tailoring, clean silhouettes, and soft tones that spoke of power tempered with grace. Her stylists curated looks that reflected confidence without excess, but behind the scenes, she struggled to secure major fashion partnerships. Deals that once would have been guaranteed now fell through during late negotiations. She's too much of a headline risk, one executive allegedly said. The story will never be about the clothes. It will always be about her. In private, Meghan was deeply aware of this shift. She confided in close friends that she felt the industry had abandoned her. They used me when it suited them, she reportedly said during a late-night call to a stylist she trusted. But now that I'm not royal, they act like I don't exist. Those words carried bitterness, but also truth. Fashion's love is conditional. It worships relevance but flees from controversy. Meghan, once its darling, had become a risk few were willing to take. Even those who tried to support her faced subtle backlash. When a lesser-known designer featured her in a campaign shortly after the Sussex's Netflix documentary release, several sponsors reportedly pulled their funding. "We can't afford to be dragged into that storm," one sponsor explained. The campaign was quietly shelved. For Meghan, it was a painful reminder that image isn't controlled by intention. It's controlled by perception, and perception is dictated by the powerful. Then came the failed negotiations with Dior. The rumors spread like wildfire. Whispers that Meghan was on the verge of signing a major deal to become the face of the brand. For days, fashion watchers speculated about the collaboration. It seemed like the perfect comeback. But Dior never confirmed it. Within a week, a spokesperson publicly denied any ongoing discussions. The denial hit harder than any tabloid headline. It was a public disavowal. A message to the entire industry that Dior would not touch the Meghan controversy. After that, other luxury names began closing their doors quietly. Valentino declined her invitation request to attend a private presentation. Chanel declined comment on whether she had been approached for collaboration. Even British designers, once loyal to her during her royal tenure, began to drift away. One fashion editor summed it up perfectly. She was fashion's headline act once. Now she's the cautionary tale. What made the fall even more ironic was that Meghan understood image better than anyone. She had built her life around managing narratives, blending activism with aesthetics. She wasn't just a consumer of fashion. She was a storyteller through it. Her outfits always carried intent. A nod to cultural heritage here, a message of empowerment there. But in a world where every move is monetized, intent means little if you're no longer profitable. Fashion doesn't reward sincerity. It rewards alignment. Meghan had drifted too far from the center of that alignment. Her attempts to rebuild connections were often met with polite refusals. When she reached out through intermediaries to reestablish ties with Givenchy, the response was diplomatic but distant. "We honor the history," the note read, "but our current direction does not align." In the language of fashion, that meant the door was closed. Her American base didn't fare much better. Hollywood stylists, wary of offending European brands, avoided linking her to major fashion deals. Even red carpet coverage of her appearances began to shrink. Outlets that once placed her in best-dressed lists now relegated her to the middle or omitted her entirely. The absence spoke louder than criticism. To outsiders, Meghan's fading presence might have looked like a natural shift, new stars replacing old ones. But those within fashion circles knew it was deliberate. Once Balenciaga drew the line, others followed silently. They weren't punishing her. They were protecting themselves. The fashion world doesn't attack openly. It isolates. But Meghan wasn't one to accept invisibility easily. She knew how to weaponize sympathy. She began appearing at humanitarian and entrepreneurial events instead of fashion shows, reframing her narrative from style icon to social advocate. Her clothes became quieter, her tone softer, her public statements more measured. She tried to portray detachment from the world that had cast her out, but the subtext was clear. She wanted back in. Those who watched her closely noticed how her style subtly referenced the past. The neutral palettes, the minimalist designs, the structured cuts, all echoes of her royal years. It was as if she was trying to remind the world of who she had been before the fallout. But fashion has a short memory. By the time she tried to reclaim her place, newer icons had taken the stage. Models, influencers, and actresses who hadn't defied the code. They were safer, more pliable, and more profitable. For Meghan, the rejection was no longer professional, it was personal. In private conversations, She reportedly described the fashion world as a circle of hypocrites who preach empowerment and punish independence. Her frustration grew not just with Balenciaga, but with the entire industry that had once adored her and now pretended not to see her. Her allies dwindled, but not entirely. A few smaller designers continued to support her quietly, drawn to her global recognition despite the risks. But these partnerships couldn't compete with the prestige of major houses. To the public, it looked like Meghan had simply chosen to move away from luxury fashion. In truth, she had been moved away, pushed out of the inner sanctum she once illuminated. Every powerful system eventually exposes its cruelty, and Meghan's journey through the fashion world had revealed its core truth. Admiration is temporary, but control is eternal. Once you step outside the approved narrative, the same hands that dressed you will pull the curtains closed. And so, when the Balenciaga fallout erupted, it wasn't just another scandal. It was the culmination of years of quiet estrangement. Her fragile relationship with fashion houses had finally shattered completely. The connections that once shaped her image were now severed, leaving her to stand alone. Stripped of alliances, stripped of influence, but still defiantly visible. In an industry obsessed with beauty, her story had become its ugliest reflection. The woman once praised for redefining modern royalty was now the woman no one wanted to mention in polite conversation. And yet, her silence in the aftermath spoke volumes. Not submission, but simmering resolve. Because while fashion had turned its back, Meghan had begun to turn her focus elsewhere. Somewhere between exile and reinvention, she was planning her return. It began like every media storm does. Quietly at first, a spark hidden beneath layers of rumor and speculation. Then, almost overnight, it exploded into a spectacle that consumed every corner of the internet. The fallout between Meghan Markle and Balenciaga had escaped the boundaries of fashion journalism and invaded global headlines. It wasn't just about clothes anymore. It was about pride, reputation, and the brutal collision between celebrity and power. The morning after Gianfranco Ginangeli's infamous "She's Nothing" remark leaked, the digital world caught fire. Screens across continents lit up with variations of the same headline. Balenciaga Director declares Meghan Markle nothing after legal threats. The words were weaponized, dissected, repeated, and distorted. Some media outlets tried to contextualize the quote. Most didn't bother. They didn't need nuance. Outrage sold better. Within hours, hashtags began trending. Hashtag boycott Balenciaga. Hashtag stand with Meghan. Hashtag she is something. Her supporters flooded social media with defenses of her dignity and condemnations of the so-called elitist cruelty of the fashion world. The opposing side struck back with equal force, accusing her of entitlement, manipulation, and self-victimization. It was chaos, a digital battlefield where truth no longer mattered. From Los Angeles to London, journalists scrambled to cover the feud. Talk shows devoted entire segments to it. Fashion critics argued over who was to blame. Some claimed Ginangeli's reaction was disproportionate and brutal. Others said it was the inevitable result of Meghan's constant boundary pushing. The media didn't want resolution, it wanted escalation. And Meghan, knowingly or not, gave it exactly that. Her team decided to act fast. Within a day of the headlines breaking, they organized a media intervention. A subtle but deliberate campaign to shift the narrative. Leaks to friendly outlets reframed the feud as a case of power versus independence, casting Meghan as the woman who dared to challenge fashion's patriarchy. Select journalists received private briefings, painting her as misunderstood, unfairly villainized, and courageously standing up for her principles.